Hey guys, welcome to the Craft Podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to learn about their disciplines and how they strive toward mastery. And we love talking to people who are passionate enough to master something. And we have each been asking curious questions our whole lives of this craft people, and want to share those conversations with others. So you will love them all. And please be sure to subscribe to our channel and also click the like button if you like our interviews. And let's get right into it. So Dan, who's with us today?
Today we're joined by Greg Kamradt. I want to make sure I'm saying your last name right.
Kamradt.
Kamradt.
Mhm.
Greg Kamradt. Greg's a data scientist, entrepreneur, has been a corporate leader, and many of us, including Michael and myself, know him from being an insightful voice for anyone who wants to learn about the latest large language model technologies, particularly recently the LangChain library, and applying them to real business problems or productivity and life problems. Or maybe not all life problems just yet, but we'll get there. Yeah. But Michael and I have both been learning a ton from Greg's YouTube channel and newsletter. But before that, Greg built a strong corporate career. He spent time leading a data science team at Salesforce and building the data startup Digits. So we have a ton to learn from his story. Greg, welcome to the craft.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm excited to dive into it today.
Yeah. So let's start with your superhero origin story. Who was young Greg? Were there any signs that this kid would grow up to teach data science and AI on YouTube?
Yeah, there's zero signs. Well, maybe if you talk to my parents, then there might have been something there. No. I mean, it's no early signs there. I can't say that I have an origin story. It all kind of started when I had my first job out of school. I was doing corporate FP&A. And what that means is that you're doing big budgets for other companies, right? And so the very first instance that I knew that I was a spreadsheet minded kind of data nerd was they would give you a list of transactions. And then this just looked like absolute gibberish when I first saw it. And it was a bunch of rows, bunch of columns, had no idea how to get into it. And they said, Greg, go extract an insight from this data. And so all of a sudden it was me needing to dive into the spreadsheet and go pull out a story, because once you have the numbers, well, then you got to go present them to people too. And so I found that I weirdly enjoyed that. I turned into an Excel monkey and I was using the keyboard, no mouse, and I could really kind of just feel the spreadsheet and go get good stuff from it. So I would say that was the first instance when I knew that, hey, Greg, you should probably lean into this a little bit more.
Right. Well, that's the data side, but most data people don't end up, on a camera sharing stuff with large audiences.
Yeah. So I guess my first foray into it was back in 2009, actually. And I did tutorials on YouTube, but it wasn't for what you'd think it'd be. It was Photoshop tutorials.
Wow.
So because back then we're talking old school Photoshop 2009, and photo editing kind of just like blew my mind, because you had this thing that you think looks static, but then all of a sudden you can apply your creativity and switch the colors and do all this other fun stuff to it. And it was back when photo editing was still hard. So I would teach people how to go do some of this stuff, and I threw it on YouTube. No face, no name, no personal brand, no nothing. I had no idea what I was doing. So those were my first videos back in 2009. And I know I'll date myself a little bit here, but I was 19 at that time doing my first videos on YouTube.
Yeah. And that was fairly early days for doing tutorial type stuff on.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was early days
right?
YouTube. I mean, we're talking like, now there's enough CSS to make it look nice and flowy and it looks modern. Back then we're still talking no rounded corners, sharp edges, like the old school MySpace looking type of YouTube versus what we have today.
Right.
Yeah.
But you must have gotten some kind of like positive feedback from those early forays that gave you the confidence, the interest to keep doing it throughout your career.
I would say it introduced me to the topic, which I thought was cool, right? But I was doing random videos. I did videos of my stepbrother. I did Photoshop tutorials. I did like stop motion animation videos, kind of just throwing everything that's up there. Yeah. I took a stop motion class at college, which was really fun. But what really convinced me to like double down on it and like go hard on it was during COVID. At the beginning of COVID, I was just reading a bunch of business books, and one of those was the Rich Dad Poor Dad one. And I liked half the book. The first half I really liked. The second half was kind of just way out there for me. But what they really drill into is the concept of assets, right? And I know everybody knows this, but assets are things that you put your energy into and they end up compounding for you, right? When you stop putting your energy into it. So we usually think of it as financial assets. You go make an investment, but another huge type of asset is a content asset. So much like y'all are doing with your content right now, after we record this video, the video is going to live on forever. And people will be able to see that and keep on viewing on it. And it's going to do work for you while you're not working anymore. So that motivated the heck out of me. And so I started, this is like, like I said, like 2020. So beginning of COVID, I doubled down on content, but specifically for data analysis. So I was teaching people how to do pandas, which is a popular Python library. And the way that I did it is I took the 60 most popular pandas functions by SEO strength. So the most Googled to the least Googled. And really, I didn't like anybody's content out there because there was either like automated content, which wasn't very good. This was before LLMs. And so it was like really bad content, or there was like kind of like lifeless one-off tutorials that really weren't really done at scale. So I said, I'm going to do this different and I'm going to go for the high quality play. So I did a video, I did a Jupyter notebook, and I did a blog post for every single one of those 60, which took 2 months because I did one per day.
Wow.
And so that's when I kind of like got really into it. And then I'll skip forward to the front part, but then late last year, ChatGPT is coming out, AI is getting huge. And I looked and there was a lack of content and educating people how to do this type of material on, especially YouTube. And I kind of it hit me. I was like, dude, you got to redo what you did for pandas, but you got to do it for this. Because it almost felt like my pandas work at the time. It felt like it was like the ends, like, oh, I just did that. It's just sitting over there, whatever. But looking back at it, it's almost like that trained me to really, really take advantage of this opportunity now and to connect with a whole lot of people. So when I started doing this AI stuff, it wasn't from scratch. And so I learned some things along the way. And I think that helped me out a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Because I think to onlookers and even to, I think us, when we started doing these podcasts, like we look at people who have been doing it for years and it's just, they look fully formed as your videos today do. But there's there's a buildup over time. There's probably a million little tips and tricks and just good practices that you build up over time. I guess starting in 2009 with Photoshop and
tutorials, right?
Amazing. But so that's just one kind of aspect of kind of your early life and career. But you were a very busy kid in college. You had worked a bunch of like service jobs during college, and I found in my life those were some of the jobs where I learned the most. What did your experience in different service jobs like teach you about life and how you wanted to spend your time?
Yeah. So the reason why those came around is I went to Loyola Marymount down in Los Angeles, California, and it's a very expensive school. And after I got done with my freshman year, my dad he pulled me to the side. He said, "Hey, Greg, you can't pay for your other 3 years like you paid for freshman year. You're going to be way too in debt." Because I pulled out a fat student loan freshman year, and I'm an 18-year-old guy. I mean, not 18-year-old guy, but 18-year-old kid. I have no idea what money means, right? Especially in the tens of thousands of dollars that we're talking about for student loans. And so I looked at my options. In sophomore year, I went to community college. And what's wild is that community college, the same year that cost me tens of thousands of dollars at LMU, was $700 for the entire year at community college.
Yeah.
Credits transferred, everything was just fine, which was wild to me. But the reason why I could go back to LMU for junior and senior year is because I joined a program that they had called the Student Worker Program. And if it wasn't for that program, I wouldn't have gone back to LMU. It completely changed my college directory. And so the trajectory, and the way that it worked was you got a full-time job, and they paid something like, it was half to 3/4 of your college tuition, but the full-time job was working on campus. And so sometimes it was trash duty. Sometimes it was, setting up chairs for graduation. Sometimes it was, rolling around and doing odd jobs for professors and things like that.
Yeah.
So it was amazing for me. Right. And not only that, but it really instilled the value of working to earn your place at this university. So I didn't have the luxury of falling back and having it being paid for through whatever means. Right. And so through financial aid, through student worker, I ended up going back, and junior year, I think I took out maybe like, it was either $5,000 or $10,000 for a student loan. And then senior year, I didn't have to take out a loan because of financial aid and because of the student worker program. So it was a really, really big thing for me at the time.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you made it through, and I guess you made it out with low or almost no debt, which is hard.
I wouldn't go that far because I was still carrying my freshman year like massive amount. So that's they give you a 6 month grace period after you graduate, where your bank doesn't you don't need to pay payments right once you get on your feet. I remember that I had a high interest rate at that time. What I thought was high. It was like 7 or 8%, right?
Yeah. We're back there now.
Well, we're back there now, but as a kid, and I just remember my mind being blown, where I'm just making up numbers now. I have no idea what they actually were, but I put in $1,000 towards my student loan, and my balance only goes down $200.
Right.
And I'm like, what just happened? Anyway, so that was my lesson into interest rates, way back then. Which, that's a whole nother story too, because the thing that helped me pay off my student loans was really getting a higher paying job. Like, I know a lot of people are like, just grind and put everything you can into it, but it wasn't until I got a higher paying job that I could really make a dent in my loans.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of ties back to the like reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, thinking about what kinds of assets can you build that will, we're not claiming passive income or any kind of secrets to becoming a billionaire, but
exactly.
Doing things that could that you could create that then would be useful assets instead of debt, which is what. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
What a lot of college students kind of end up with throughout their lives. But so you were also active in other ways in college. You joined a fraternity, Sigma Chi, but you weren't just like a member. You, I think, were president.
Yeah.
What did you learn there about building community? I'm sure because I would imagine there were probably parallels to building teams and maybe even building a YouTube community later on in your career.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
YouTube maybe, but either way, the fraternity was a hugely transformational process for me at LMU. I mean, it was my life, right? And so I joined second semester freshman year, and I was through the rest. It was an amazing opportunity, not only because of the service that we all did too. So we did a lot of community service, but then the brotherhood with all the guys that you're hanging out with, and the involvement in school. It just was a very active way to participate in university. And it's not for everybody. Totally cool. It resonated well with me, and I liked it. And so what was I going to say about, so going into, it was like second semester junior year, and there was about to be elections for leadership positions in the fraternity. And I forget where I had this spurt or the energy, but it was one of those quotes of like, if not you, then who? Right. And, I had another huge spurt of motivation. And I remember sitting in a classroom with a friend and just pounding out kind of like, what is my pitch? And like what is my platform in my campaign and all that? And ended up doing the rounds because the way that you do elections is, you basically give your presentation in front of everybody, and the voting process isn't very sophisticated. It's raise of hands, but either way, I ended up getting it. And that was my first leadership position. And more than anything, it instilled into me the confidence that, hey, dude, if you want something, go after it. And then now, because of this confidence that I had, it had me do other leadership positions throughout life, which that was the really first big stepping stone that made me believe in myself, which was really awesome. The other lesson that I learned while being president, which I'll say right now, that is carried with me through life, is getting the fraternity to do anything was a big pain in the ass, right? If you needed volunteers for something, if you needed, basically volunteers for a lot of things. And if you send out a text message to the fraternity-wide channel, nobody would respond, right? And I'm looking at the room while I'm having one of my chapter meetings. I'm thinking to myself, but that's so weird, because if I asked anybody individually, they would say, yes, of course, dude, Greg, I got you, no problem. So at that moment, I realized if you want to get support with somebody, you really need the connection with them, and you should really reach out one-on-one, because then they're going to they'll do anything you need for them. But doing a mass email or a mass text message, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Right. That's key leadership insight for dealing with groups. And and the same is true if they're your employees and you're paying them versus volunteers. The same dynamic occurs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So then you took those lessons forward, and then after college, you mentioned getting into corporate finance. Initially, and you kind of had the spark of like finding insight in data, and then taking it to other team members and explaining it. But eventually, I guess you fell out of love with corporate finance and more in love with data science. Yeah.
So you got to put if I put myself in my shoes back then, right? I was working in a cubicle. I know it's like funny, but like it's completely foreign these days, but I was working in a cubicle and I was doing finance and living in the Bay. It was also in the South Bay. So for those with the Bay Area geography, San Francisco's, there's a lot going on there. Old school Silicon Valley is going to be down in the South Bay. And that's where this company was. And so I'm doing finance. It feels like the world is kind of passing me by because I'm hearing all this tech movement, and I have nothing to do with product, nothing to do with eng, nothing to do with building new things, investors, or the progress forward. I'm doing budgets. And no hate for anybody doing budgets. Just me as a 23-year-old, it was not vibing with me well. I had my clothes are too big. I didn't know how to dress. I had to wear tucked in shirts every day, that type of thing. And so more than anything, it was just a restlessness to want to get out. And so I went and traveled, basically. I left, I think it probably was about 6 months or 7 months or 8 months or something like that. Backpacked Europe. I worked at a hostel in Italy, which is where I got some hospitality experience, which was crazy. It was one of those live work exchanges where they don't pay you, but you can stay there for free and you can eat for free, which is a good deal. Yeah. That was fabulous. And then I came back to the States and I had this realization where it's like, dude, you can't just go land back in San Francisco, because then it's like you left and nothing changed and nothing was to show of this big, kind of chapter change that you had in your life. And so I found myself in DC. And when I was in DC, I started to inch my way into Python. So at this point, I only knew Excel, but still to this day, and I very, very thoroughly believe that if you know Excel, you can learn to code Python. It's not the same, but if you think about Excel, you're working with tabular data. You're working with rows. You're working with columns, fields. You're working with if statements. I mean, you're not that far off from doing Python. And so I was doing that. And then I found a PDF, and I think it was called Data Mining for Programmers or Data Mining for Practitioners or something. I can share it afterwards for show notes. But I read that, and the author made the topic of data science so approachable. It blew my mind. And one of the first exercises was to implement a recommendation system. So not only talk about what it is, but then implement it. And it was like, wow. So a recommendation system is only measuring the distances between users and the ratings that they have on songs or whatever, and then seeing which user you're most similar to, and then recommending something from their library.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so I got inundated on this idea. And then but this was just me messing around in my studio, right? How do I take it to the next level? This was back in 2015. And it was when boot camps were big, but web boot camps were big and mobile boot camps were big.
Mm-hmm.
There was no data science boot camps. There was one, and it was called Zipfian Academy, and they had just started. But I looked at their website, and it said, of our graduates, 95% get a job within 6 months, and your average out of job salary is double what I was making at corporate finance. So I was like,
good stats.
I like this. It's a technical skill, which I know is in high demand. I'm probably going to get a job, and my job is probably going to pay me double. Yeah, sure. I'll go and do this. So I applied and I took an interview. I have no idea why they ended up taking me. There was one section on the stats that I just completely bombed with, Poisson distributions and things like that. It was wild. So I did that anyway, ended up getting in. I got my student loans delayed for another 3 months because the third party lender, Wells Fargo, actually was very generous, and it was an uncommon request that I say, hey, can you stop this for this time, because it's another schooling, I'm trying to better myself, et cetera. They were down for it. They stopped it. I took the program. I went heads down for 3.5 months, like 12 hours a day. That's where I picked up Python, picked up pandas, hit the job market hard, and ended up getting a job at Salesforce. And that really changed. I mean, that changed my entire career. Not only was my career identity different, but I was getting paid more, and I was now in San Francisco in the tech scene. So it totally changed it for me.
Wow. Yeah. So cool that you kind of like saw this, what you wanted to be doing. And then over, I guess, the course of several months taken, through a lot of hard work, but you made that transition happen. And then you ended up on this trajectory that probably like maybe a year, 2 years before seemed like a total dream.
Oh, believe me, man. Like I was in my DC studio apartment and like really like down on myself, just thinking like, what the heck am I doing? Where am I going? What's the path in life? Where, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that initially turned me on to that PDF was I was just tinkering around with stuff. Like, I was just trying to tinker with data, tinker with a little bit of Python. Like I had no idea what I'm doing, anyway, so the tinkering got me. It was a stepping stone to getting forward.
Awesome.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and also like maybe go on to that. So I mean that since that has been like for a long time. So right now you're becoming really seasoned and experienced. So like how do you see the evolution of the landscape of data science from your perspective?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So back in 2015, that was when the article was coming around that somebody had wrote that was like, oh, data science is going to be the sexiest job of the 21st century. Remember that whole phase? That was a little while ago, right?
Yeah.
It's wild because nobody would say that now. They'd say, like an ML engineer or something like that. But so that was going on. So at Salesforce, that was a corporate data environment, right? Which is completely different than a startup data environment. There's pros and cons to both. Back then, data science was, there's kind of two routes. I mean, it's kind of even the same now. I mean, you have your really, really deep ML, like research academic side. And then you have your more practitioner application. Let's use algorithms to go do cool things. And that's the route that I ended up going. So I was a person who would use classification algorithms, who would do time series forecasting, who would do regressions and things like that to go do product analytics at Salesforce. And so I stepped into this role unbeknownst to me, really, because I was still figuring it out. It was a growth role. which is a Venn diagram of good data skills, but then also the application side and doing it within product analytics, but then also trying to storytell to your stakeholders, like what the heck your recommendation is to go do.
Right.
So anyway, so data science back then was kind of like vanilla random forests. Like that's the easiest way I can, like, go spin up scikit-learn, go open up a Jupyter notebook, go do a train test split, and go mess around and go tune some hyperparameters and go do grid search to try to find the best ones, and all that other stuff. And that was also when you did it on with your local data sets. And so, like, you could load up a lot of data sets within your own Jupyter notebook. It was no big deal. Right. Now, I mean, the tools are just so much more advanced, and it almost seems like people are moving past the vanilla classification algorithms, where if you're using random forest, it's almost like you do it because it's only 2 lines of code and you just want to try it out. People are moving on to more sophisticated types of things. And I won't speculate about where it's going, but with the AI stuff, there's just a lot more question marks around what types of skills should you invest in right now, if you wanted to, leverage your energy as much as possible.
Right.